The doorbell rang twice on Christmas Eve. When the 40-year-old millionaire opened the door, he froze. 4 toddlers in matching white sweaters stood on his porch. Identical faces, dark skin, his eyes staring back at him 4 times over. Behind them, the maid he'd fired 3 years ago for being pregnant. "They wanted to meet their father," she said, her voice steady as stone. What he didn't know was that this holiday visit would cost him everything he'd built and force him to become the man he should have been all along. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get started. "Everything must be perfect tonight, absolutely perfect," James Wilson said, adjusting the crystal champagne flute exactly 1 inch from the edge of the table. His voice was cold and precise, just like his movements. "Yes, Mr. Wilson," replied the head server, watching nervously as his employer inspected every detail of the Christmas Eve dinner setup. The massive Georgian mansion on Beacon Hill glowed with expensive decorations. Red and gold ornaments hung from the 12-foot Christmas tree in the grand hall. Holly garlands draped over marble fireplaces. Everything sparkled under chandeliers that had cost more than most people's homes. James glanced at his watch. 6 o'clock exactly. The first guests would arrive in 1 hour for his annual Christmas Eve business dinner. This year's event was especially important. Tonight, he would announce his engagement to Victoria Blackwell, merging his real estate empire with the Blackwell family fortune. "The ice sculpture for the center table is melting slightly on the left side," James said, pointing to an almost invisible imperfection. "Replace it immediately." "But sir, we don't have a backup." "Then find one. Now." The server hurried away as James turned his attention to the dining room. 24 place settings of fine china and sterling silver flatware waited for Boston's business elite. Each napkin was folded into the shape of a Christmas tree, not because James cared about holiday spirit, but because appearances mattered. At 45 years old, James Wilson had built Wilson Properties into a $500 million empire, with developments spanning from Maine to Florida. His success came from attention to detail and an unwavering focus on the bottom line. Nothing distracted him from his goals. Not relationships, not emotions, and certainly not Christmas sentimentality. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. "Daddy and I are getting ready. Can't wait to make our announcement tonight. Love you." James didn't reply with "Love you too." Instead, he typed, "Everything is prepared. See you at 7. He walked to his study and opened the small velvet box containing the 5-carat diamond engagement ring. The jeweler had assured him it was flawless, exactly what someone of Victoria's standing would expect. James had selected it the same way he chose properties for development, based on value, appearance, and strategic advantage. As he rehearsed his announcement speech, his mind briefly flashed back 3 years. Amara Johnson had stood in this same study, tears streaming down her face. "I'm pregnant, James," she had said, her voice barely above a whisper. He had been cold and efficient then too. "That's unfortunate," he had replied, opening his desk drawer and writing a check with many zeros. "This should cover any expenses. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. I trust you'll be discreet." James pushed the memory away and straightened his tie. That situation had been handled. A business problem solved with a business solution. At 6:30, his security system alerted him to the first arrivals. Right on time, Richard Blackwell, Victoria's father and James's largest investor, stepped out of a black Lincoln, helping his wife Margaret up the snow-dusted steps of the mansion. "Richard, Margaret, welcome," James said, greeting them at the door with practiced charm. "Victoria isn't with you?" "She's coming separately," Richard explained, handing his coat to the waiting staff. "Said something about making a grand entrance for her big night." James smiled. "Of course. Please come in. The bar is set up in the main hall." More guests arrived, bank executives, real estate developers, city officials whose goodwill ensured permits were approved without delay. James moved among them, discussing property values and tax advantages. No one mentioned Christmas beyond superficial compliments about the decorations. "Wilson, that waterfront project in Providence, is it still on schedule for spring?" asked Thomas Green, a potential investor. "Absolutely," James replied. "The environmental studies came back clean and—" The doorbell interrupted him. James frowned. All invited guests had arrived, and the caterers had been instructed to use the service entrance. "Excuse me," he said to Thomas, annoyed at the disruption. James opened the heavy front door himself, expecting perhaps a late delivery. Instead, a young woman stood on his doorstep, her breath visible in the cold December air. It took him several seconds to recognize Amara Johnson. Her hair was different now, cut shorter around her face. She wore a simple wool coat, nothing like the expensive outfits of his other guests. But her eyes, determined and unafraid, were exactly as he remembered. "Hello, James," she said calmly. Before he could respond, he noticed she wasn't alone. Standing beside her were 4 small boys, perhaps 4 or 5 years old. They were identical. Same caramel-colored skin, same curly dark hair, same serious expressions, and they all had the same distinctive gray-green eyes. His eyes. "They wanted to meet their father," Amara said simply. The blood drained from James's face as he stared at 4 perfect copies of himself in miniature form. "This is Michael, Marcus, Matthew, and Miles," Amara continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. One of the boys, James couldn't tell which one, stepped forward and said in a clear voice, "Hello, Father." The word "father" echoed in James's mind like a thunderclap. Behind him, he heard gasps and whispers. Turning slightly, he saw Richard Blackwell standing in the hallway, champagne glass frozen halfway to his lips. Beside him, several other guests stared openly at the scene unfolding at the doorway. "James?" Richard's voice cut through the silence. "Who are these children?" James opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, he had no prepared response, no strategy, no solution. Another of the quadruplets tugged at Amara's coat. "Mom, is he happy to see us?" The boy whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. James felt his perfect world crumbling around him. Through the crowd, he saw Victoria approaching from the back of the hall, her red dress bright against the Christmas decorations, her smile fading as she took in the scene. "I thought they should know where they come from," Amara explained, her dignity intact despite her simple clothes and the whispers growing behind James. "They have questions only you can answer." The tallest of the boys, Michael, if James had heard correctly, spoke up again. "We made you Christmas cards." He held up 4 handmade cards, each decorated with different colored glitter and childish drawings. James still couldn't find his voice. His entire body felt frozen, not from the December cold, but from the shock of seeing his DNA reflected in 4 identical faces that were both familiar and completely unknown to him. Behind him, Richard Blackwell's voice cut through the silence. "James, I think we need to speak privately." The words carried a clear message. Damage control was needed immediately. The moment stretched as snowflakes began falling softly around Amara and the quadruplets. Behind them, a taxi waited at the curb, their ride back to whatever life they had built without him. Ahead of them stood James Wilson, suspended between his past mistakes and his carefully planned future, unable to move forward or back. "James?" Victoria called from inside the house, her voice rising with confusion and the first notes of anger. "What's happening? Who are these people?" One of the boys, Miles or Matthew, James couldn't tell, stepped closer and looked up at him with innocent curiosity. "Do you have a Christmas tree?" "Mom says all dads have Christmas trees." The simple question from his son, broke something inside James Wilson. The perfect night he had planned, the business empire he had built, the strategic marriage he had arranged, suddenly none of it seemed to matter compared to the 4 pairs of gray-green eyes looking up at him expectantly. The whispers grew louder behind James as Victoria pushed her way through the crowd of guests. Her face changed from confusion to shock as she looked at the 4 identical boys standing in the doorway. "James, what is this?" Victoria demanded, her voice shaking. She looked from the children to Amara and back to James. James still couldn't speak. The Christmas music playing through the house speakers suddenly felt too loud, too cheerful for the moment. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow," Amara said quietly. She reached into her purse and handed James a small piece of paper. "This is my address and phone number. When you're ready to talk, call me. The boys have waited 3 years to meet you. They can wait 1 more day." She guided the quadruplets back toward the waiting taxi. The boys looked over their shoulders at James, their faces showing a mixture of disappointment and curiosity. As the taxi pulled away, Victoria grabbed James's arm with fingers that dug into his skin. "Explain. Now." James closed the front door and turned to face a room full of stunned guests. "I apologize for the interruption," he said mechanically. "Dinner will be served in 15 minutes. "James!" Victoria hissed. "We need to talk privately." In his study, with the door firmly closed, Victoria paced back and forth while James sat motionless behind his desk. "Those children, they're yours, aren't they?" Victoria said. "Don't lie to me." I saw their eyes. "I didn't know there were 4 of them," James said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I knew she was pregnant, but I never—" "You never what? Bothered to find out? Cared enough to check?" Victoria's voice rose. She stopped pacing and slammed her hands on his desk. "How could you not tell me about this? We were going to announce our engagement tonight." "It was handled," James said. "I gave her money. She agreed never to contact me." Victoria stared at him with growing disgust. "Handled? Like a business transaction? Those are your children, James." She twisted the diamond ring off her finger and dropped it on the desk. "There will be no announcement tonight. Or ever." The ring bounced twice before settling next to his computer. Victoria walked to the door, then turned back. "You know what's truly sad? I'm not even surprised. This is exactly who you are." The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt louder than if she had slammed it. The next morning, Christmas Day. James sat in the same chair, still wearing his suit from the night before. His phone had not stopped ringing. 27 missed calls from board members, business partners, and Richard Blackwell. 12 voicemails, 43 text messages. Sarah Martinez, his assistant, entered without knocking. "You look terrible," she said, placing a cup of coffee on his desk. "What are you doing here?" "It's Christmas," James said. "Damage control doesn't take holidays," Sarah replied. She had worked for James for 8 years and was the only person who spoke to him this directly. "Richard Blackwell called me at 6 this morning. He's pulling out of the Westbrook development and the Miami project." James nodded slowly. "I expected that. Victoria's father wants nothing to do with you or Wilson Properties. His exact words were morally bankrupt," Sarah continued, checking her notes. 3 board members have requested an emergency meeting. The Boston Globe called asking for comment on a personal matter. I told them you were unavailable." "How do they know already?" James asked. "James, Margaret Blackwell has 500 friends on Facebook," Sarah said. "News travels fast." James picked up the small paper Amara had given him. Her handwriting was neat and precise, just as he remembered. "I need you to arrange a meeting with attorney Daniel Thompson," James said. "Today, if possible." "On Christmas?" Sarah raised her eyebrows. "Yes, and I need paternity tests scheduled." Sarah nodded and made a note. "What about Amara Johnson and the children?" James stared at the paper in his hand. I'll handle that personally." In a small apartment in Dorchester, Amara sat at her kitchen table with her sister Rachel. 4 identical boys played with new Christmas toys in the living room, action figures and coloring books, simple gifts that had been carefully saved for. "I still can't believe you actually did it," Rachel said, shaking her head. "Walking up to that mansion, with all those rich people watching. The boys deserve to know who their father is," Amara said. She stirred her tea slowly. "And James needed to know about them. After how he treated you, he fired you the minute you told him you were pregnant." Rachel's voice rose with indignation. "Shh," Amara cautioned, nodding toward the boys. "This isn't about him or me. It's about Michael, Marcus, Matthew, and Miles. They've been asking questions I can't answer." "What kind of questions?" Rachel asked. "Why they don't have a dad when other kids do. Why they all look exactly the same, where they got their green eyes." Amara sighed. "I've been honest with them in ways they can understand. I told them their father is a busy man who builds big buildings. I've never made him the villain or the hero." "And now?" Rachel asked. "Now we wait. Either he'll call or he won't." As if on cue, Amara's phone rang. She looked at the unknown number and answered cautiously. "Hello? Amara, it's James Wilson." His voice was stiff, formal. "I'd like to meet with you and the boys." Amara closed her eyes briefly. "When?" "Tomorrow. There's a restaurant in Cambridge called Family Table. It's appropriate for children, 1 o'clock. "We'll be there," Amara said. She ended the call and looked at Rachel. "He wants to meet tomorrow." "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Rachel asked. "No," Amara admitted, "but it's necessary." James sat in his lawyer's office, uncomfortable in jeans and a sweater rather than his usual suit. Daniel Thompson reviewed the documents in front of him. "So you had a brief relationship with Miss Johnson 3 years ago while she was employed as your household manager," Daniel summarized. "It wasn't a relationship," James corrected. "It was an error in judgment. She worked for me during my divorce. There was one night when—" "I don't need those details," Daniel interrupted. "The important facts are, she informed you of her pregnancy, you terminated her employment, provided financial compensation, and had no further contact until yesterday." "Correct. And you had no knowledge that she had given birth to quadruplets?" "None," James confirmed. "The check I gave her was substantial. I assumed she had taken care of it." Daniel looked at James over his glasses. "Taken care of it?" James shifted in his chair. "Yes." "Well, clearly she didn't," Daniel said. "And now there are 4 5-year-old boys who appear to be your biological children. We'll need DNA tests to confirm paternity, of course." "I've already arranged that," James said. "Good. Once paternity is established, we'll need to discuss child support, visitation rights, and potentially custody arrangements." Daniel made some notes. "Do you want custody?" The question caught James off guard. I don't know. I've never even met them properly." Daniel nodded. "That's honest, at least. My advice? Meet them. Get to know them. Then we'll figure out the legal side." The Family Table restaurant was crowded with post-Christmas diners. James arrived 15 minutes early, wearing what he hoped was appropriately casual clothing. He felt conspicuously out of place among the plastic booths and paper placemats. At exactly 1 o'clock, Amara arrived with the boys. Each wore different colored coats, blue, green, red, and yellow, which James realized was how she told them apart. They stared at him with identical curious expressions. "Hello," James said awkwardly. "Thank you for coming." "Boys," Amara said, "this is Mr. Wilson, your father." "You can call me James," he said quickly, then wondered if that was the right thing to say. The boys slid into the booth, all on the same side with Amara. James sat alone on the opposite side. "I got you all chocolate milk," James said, pointing to 5 glasses on the table. "I hope that's okay." "Thank you," they chorused in unison. An uncomfortable silence fell. James looked at each boy, trying to see differences between them. They were completely identical, from their curly hair to the shape of their ears. "So," James said finally, "you're all 5 years old?" 5.5, one of the boys in a green coat corrected. "That's Matthew," Amara said. "He's very precise about details." "Like you," another boy said. Michael, in the blue coat. James blinked in surprise. "You know things about me?" "Mom tells us stories," Marcus said quietly from behind his red coat. "She says you build big buildings that touch the sky." "And you're very rich," added Miles in yellow. "And you have gray-green eyes like us." James looked at Amara, surprised that she had told them positive things about him. "I wanted them to know where they came from," Amara explained, "even if you weren't ready to know them." Michael, clearly the most direct of the 4, leaned forward. "Why didn't you ever come see us before? Didn't you want to know about us?" The simple question hit James like a physical blow. The truth, that he had assumed they didn't exist, seemed impossible to say. James began, then stopped. For the second time in 24 hours, James Wilson had no answer. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Looking down, he saw a message from Sarah. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow at 9. Subject: your continued leadership of Wilson Properties." James silenced his phone and put it back in his pocket. The 4 identical faces were still watching him, waiting for an answer to Michael's question. "I didn't know about you," James said finally. "I didn't know your mother had 4 babies." "But you knew about me," Amara said quietly. "You just didn't ask what happened." The waiter arrived with menus, breaking the tense moment. James was grateful for the interruption. He watched as Amara helped each boy choose food, noting how she patiently explained menu items to Marcus, who seemed to read more slowly than his brothers. After they ordered, Miles asked, "Do you build houses or just big buildings?" "Both," James replied, relieved by the simple question. "My company builds many types of buildings." "We live in an apartment," Matthew stated. "It's small, but we all have beds." "We share a bedroom," Michael added. "Mom says when she finishes school we might get a bigger place." James looked at Amara. "You're still in school?" "I finished my nursing degree last year," she said. "I work at Boston General now." James was surprised. He had assumed his check would have taken care of her financially for years. "That's impressive. Working and raising 4 children while completing your education." "We didn't have many choices," Amara said simply. The food arrived, and James watched how Amara cut the boys' sandwiches into small pieces. She clearly had a system for everything. Each boy had his own way of eating. Michael quickly, Marcus carefully, Matthew talking between bites, and Miles saving his fruit for last. When lunch ended, James said awkwardly, "I'd like to see you again. All of you." "We need to do paternity tests first," Amara replied, "for legal reasons." "I've arranged that already. The clinic can see us tomorrow," James said. Michael tugged at Amara's sleeve. "What's a paternity test?" "It's a way to prove that Mr. Wilson is your biological father," Amara explained. "But we already know that," Miles said. "We have his eyes." "Yes," Amara smiled gently, "but sometimes adults need special proof." The next morning, James sat at the head of the conference table in the Wilson Properties boardroom. 7 board members watched him with expressions ranging from concern to open hostility. "Let's address the elephant in the room," said Edward Brooks, the most senior board member. "Your personal situation has become very public, very quickly." "My personal life has no impact on my ability to run this company," James stated firmly. "The Blackwell investments represented 20% of our capital for the Westbrook development," said Linda Chen, the chief financial officer. "Richard Blackwell has withdrawn completely. We can find other investors," James countered. Edward leaned forward. "James, this isn't just about money. It's about trust. You hid the existence of 4 children. You fired their mother when she became pregnant. These are not the actions of someone with sound judgment." "My personal choices," James began. "Reflect on your professional choices," Linda interrupted. "3 partners have already called me asking if we're keeping you as CEO." James looked around the table. Most wouldn't meet his eyes. Only Sarah, sitting in the corner taking notes, gave him an encouraging nod. "I founded this company," James said firmly. "I've built it from nothing to one of the most successful real estate development firms in the Northeast. One personal situation does not erase 20 years of success." The board meeting lasted 3 hours. In the end, they voted to keep James as CEO, for now. But the message was clear. One more mistake, and he would be out. Over the next 2 weeks, the paternity tests confirmed what was visually obvious. All 4 boys were definitely James's sons. With this legal confirmation, James and Amara, with their respective attorneys, established a temporary visitation schedule. James would see the boys twice weekly at public places rather than at his home or their apartment. After their 3rd meeting, James asked Daniel Thompson to stay for coffee after signing the interim support agreement. "How am I doing with this?" James asked, an unusual moment of uncertainty from a man known for his confidence. Daniel considered the question carefully. "You're doing the legal minimum, but these boys need more than your money and occasional visits." "I don't know how to be a father," James admitted. "My own father was not involved." "Neither did I," Daniel said, surprising James. He pulled out his wallet and showed a photo of 2 teenage boys. "My sons are adopted. I had no idea how to be a father when they came to us at ages 6 and 8, but I learned." "How?" James asked. "By showing up. By trying. By making mistakes and fixing them," Daniel replied. "Children don't need perfect fathers. They need present ones." The following Saturday, James met the boys at the Boston Children's Museum. He still struggled to tell them apart, until Sarah suggested he focus on their personalities rather than trying to spot physical differences. He watched as Michael naturally took charge, organizing his brothers to explore exhibits in order. Marcus hung back, observing everything quietly before engaging. Matthew made jokes, causing his brothers to laugh. Miles was drawn to every art activity, creating with intense focus. "They all look identical, but they're completely different people," James said to Amara, who sat on a bench watching from a distance. "They've been that way since they were babies," she replied. Even when they were newborns, Miles would stare at colorful objects. Matthew would make the most noise, Michael would watch everyone, and Marcus would study one thing for minutes. "It must have been overwhelming," James said. 4 babies at once." "It was," Amara acknowledged. "My sister Rachel moved from Atlanta to help. She put her own life on hold for 2 years. James felt a flash of shame. While a stranger had sacrificed to help raise his children, he had been completely absent. "How did you manage financially?" he asked. "The check I gave you. I worked 3 jobs until the babies came," Amara cut him off. "After they were born, Rachel worked while I finished school. We survived." Before James could respond, Miles ran over, his eyes bright with excitement. "Dad, come see what I made!" It was the first time any of the boys had called him Dad instead of Mr. Wilson, and James felt something shift inside him. He followed Miles to a table where a clay sculpture sat proudly. "It's our apartment building," Miles explained, pointing to small details. As they walked through the museum, James's phone rang repeatedly with work calls. For the first time in his career, he silenced it completely. That night, James sat in his home office looking at his phone. 17 missed calls. But instead of returning them, he opened his laptop and typed "Child Development 5 years old" into the search bar. An hour later, he was still reading, making notes about developmental milestones, emotional needs, and parenting techniques. The following Thursday, James arrived at the agreed meeting place, a park near Amara's apartment, with 4 small toy cars. Each was identical except for the color: blue, red, green, and yellow. "I thought they would like these," he said, holding them out to Amara. She smiled slightly. "Michael likes building things, not cars. Marcus prefers books. Matthew likes anything that makes noise. Only Miles really plays with toy cars." "Oh," James said, embarrassed. "I should have asked first." "You're learning," Amara said, her voice softer than usual. "That's what matters." As the boys played on the playground, Miles suddenly fell and scraped his knee. Before Amara could reach him, James was there, kneeling beside the crying boy. "You're okay," James said gently, the words coming from somewhere he didn't recognize. "Can I see?" Miles showed his bleeding knee, tears streaming down his face. James carefully wiped the dirt away with his handkerchief, then applied a Band-Aid from the small first aid kit Amara always carried. "There," James said. "All better?" Miles nodded, his tears stopping. "It doesn't hurt much now." "You were very brave," James said, and was surprised to feel Miles's small arms wrap around his neck in a quick hug before the boy ran back to play. James stood up, oddly shaken by the simple interaction. He caught Amara watching him with an unreadable expression. "That was good," she said simply. "He needed that from you." As they watched the boys play, James's phone vibrated in his pocket. Looking down, he saw a message from Sarah. "Victoria's father just bought the Westbrook property out from under us. The deal is final." James stared at the message from Sarah, his hand tightening around the phone. The Westbrook development had been planned as Wilson Properties' most important project of the year. Now it was gone. "Bad news?" Amara asked, noticing his expression. "Work," James said simply, putting his phone away. He wouldn't let business intrude on his time with the boys. That was a new rule he'd made for himself. But the next morning, the full impact of Richard Blackwell's revenge became clear during an emergency board meeting at Wilson Properties. Richard Blackwell didn't just buy the Westbrook property, Linda Chen explained, showing financial charts on the conference room screen. "He's also contacted our other funding partners. 3 banks have now declined to finance our Cambridge project. This is personal," James said. "Blackwell is punishing me, not the company." Edward Brooks nodded. "Exactly our concern. Your personal situation is damaging Wilson Properties." "What are you suggesting?" James asked, though he already knew. "A temporary leave of absence," Edward said. "Just until this blows over. The board believes the company would recover faster if you stepped back for a while." James looked around the table. Most board members avoided eye contact. "I built this company from nothing. You can't push me out because of my private life." "No one is pushing you out," Linda said carefully. "But we need to think about our investors, our employees, our projects." The meeting ended without a vote, but the message was clear. James's position was in danger. As he returned to his office, Sarah followed with a stack of messages. "The Johnson brothers canceled tomorrow's meeting," she said. "The Boston Club has also called about your membership status." "They want to kick me out of the club?" James asked, surprised. "They mentioned moral character requirements in their bylaws," Sarah explained, "and Mrs. Harrington from the Children's Hospital Fundraising Committee wanted to know if you'll still be co-chairing the spring gala." James sat heavily in his chair. "What should I tell her?" "I already did," Sarah replied. "I said you'd be honored to continue supporting the hospital, as you have for 15 years. James looked up at her with gratitude. "Thank you." "They can judge you for having children out of wedlock," Sarah said firmly. "But they still want your money." Later that week, James arrived at Amara's apartment building for the first time. Their previous meetings had always been in public places. He stood awkwardly in the hallway, holding shopping bags. Amara opened the door with Miles clinging to her leg. "Come in," she said. "Sorry about the mess." The apartment was small but clean. Toys were neatly organized in bins. 4 backpacks hung on hooks by the door. A fold-out table in the kitchen area was covered with schoolwork. "I brought dinner," James said, holding up the bags, "and some books the store recommended for 5-year-olds. "That was thoughtful," Amara said. "The boys are doing homework. Michael and Marcus are almost done, but Matthew is struggling with his letters." James followed her into the living room, where the other 3 boys sat on a worn carpet. Michael and Marcus wrote carefully in workbooks. Matthew frowned at his paper, erasing the same letter repeatedly. "It's stupid," Matthew muttered. James knelt beside him. "Which letter is giving you trouble?" "R," Matthew said. "It looks wrong every time." "May I?" James asked, taking the pencil when Matthew nodded. "Watch how I start at the top, go down straight, then make the curved part." Matthew tried again, his small face serious with concentration. "Better?" "Much better," James said. Later, as the boys ate dinner, James noticed how cramped the apartment was. All 4 boys shared one small bedroom with 2 bunk beds. Amara slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. There were no extras, no waste. "This apartment must be expensive, even with its size," James commented quietly to Amara as they washed dishes. $1,500 a month, Amara replied. "It takes most of my salary, but it's close to their school and my job." "You managed all this alone?" James asked. "Not completely alone," Amara said. "My sister Rachel moved here to help when I was pregnant. She put her own life on hold for 2 years." "What about when the boys were born?" James asked. Amara's hands stilled in the soapy water. "I was working 3 jobs until a week before they came. The delivery was difficult. 4 babies don't want to wait their turn." Her smile was tight. "Rachel was with me, at least. She took family leave from the restaurant where she worked." "And after that?" "We took shifts. I worked nights at a convenience store after the boys were 3 months old. During the day, I took classes online while Rachel worked. When she moved back to Atlanta last year, we had to adjust again." James tried to imagine Amara pregnant with quadruplets, working multiple jobs, then caring for 4 newborns while continuing her education. The strength required was staggering. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "You didn't ask," Amara replied simply. The next morning, James was in a video conference with potential investors when his phone rang. Seeing Amara's number, he almost ignored it, but something stopped him. "Excuse me," he said to the investors. "I need to take this call." "James," Amara's voice was tense. "Matthew has a fever of 103 degrees. I'm taking him to the emergency room." "Which hospital?" James asked immediately. "Boston Children's. My neighbor is watching the other boys, but—" "I'll meet you there," James said, already standing. "But your work doesn't matter," James said firmly. "I'm coming." James ended his video call despite Sarah's wide eyes. "Cancel my meetings for the rest of the day," he told her. "Matthew is sick." The emergency room was crowded with worried parents and crying children. James spotted Amara immediately, sitting with Matthew on her lap. The normally energetic boy was listless, his cheeks flushed with fever. "How is he?" James asked, sitting beside them. "The same," Amara said, sounding tired. "They'll call us soon." Matthew opened his eyes. "Dad," he said weakly, "you came." "Of course I did," James replied, surprised at how natural the response felt. A nurse called Matthew's name, and they followed her to an examination room. The doctor checked Matthew thoroughly, then ordered blood tests. "He'll need to stay for intravenous fluids and antibiotics," the doctor explained. "It looks like strep throat with possible complications." As they waited for Matthew to be admitted, James saw a familiar face across the emergency room. Daniel Thompson, his attorney, sitting with a small boy whose arm was in a temporary splint. "James?" Daniel said, walking over. "What are you doing here?" "My son has a high fever," James explained. Then, realizing what he'd said, "My son," without hesitation, he added, "Matthew." Daniel's expression changed from professional politeness to genuine concern. "I'm sorry to hear that. My boy Charlie broke his arm at soccer practice." He looked at Matthew, then at Amara. "This must be very stressful for all of you." "It is," Amara admitted. "And I need to check on the other boys soon." "I can stay with Matthew," James offered immediately. "You go home, make sure the others are okay, and get some rest." Amara hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," James said firmly. "I'll call you with any updates." After Amara left, James sat beside Matthew's hospital bed. The boy looked tiny, surrounded by medical equipment. When Matthew whimpered in his sleep, James instinctively took his hand, surprised when the small fingers gripped his tightly. Daniel stopped by before leaving with his son. He watched James for a moment, then said quietly, "You know, when you first came to my office, I thought you were just concerned about your legal and financial obligations." "I was," James admitted. "But this is different," Daniel observed. "This is being a father." James looked down at Matthew, who had finally fallen into a peaceful sleep. "I'm trying to learn how." Daniel nodded. "It shows." 2 days later, with Matthew recovered and back home, James received another blow to his professional standing. The Boston Globe's Society page featured a small article about his secret family being revealed at a Christmas party. The article mentioned his fall from grace in Boston's elite social circles. Sarah placed the newspaper on his desk. "People are talking. The Winstons removed you from their dinner party guest list this weekend. People I've known for 20 years are suddenly judging me," James said bitterly. "Yes," Sarah agreed. "But I've noticed something. When you got that call about Matthew, you didn't hesitate. For the first time since I've known you, something mattered more than Wilson Properties." James looked at her, surprised. "When did you become so insightful?" "I've always been insightful," Sarah smiled. "You just never asked my opinion before." That evening, James sat alone in his mansion. The large rooms felt empty and cold. On his phone, he scrolled through photos from the past month, the boys at the museum, at the park, even a few from Matthew's hospital room. In each picture, their faces looked more familiar to him, their personalities more distinct. His phone rang. It was Linda Chen from the board. "James," she said without preamble, "we need to discuss the company's future. The stock has dropped 12% since the news about your children broke." "I understand," James said. "Schedule a meeting for next week." After hanging up, James stared at a family photo of the quadruplets that Amara had given him. For the first time in his adult life, his company didn't feel like the most important thing in his world. James placed the family photo of the quadruplets on his desk, next to the invitation to the annual Wilson Properties Charity Gala. The gala was always the biggest real estate event of the spring season in Boston. Everyone who mattered in business would be there. A thought suddenly formed in his mind. He picked up his phone and called Sarah. "The charity gala next month," he said when she answered. "I want to bring guests." "Victoria is definitely not coming," Sarah replied. "Not Victoria. My sons." James paused, surprised by his own decision. "All 4 of them." There was silence on the line. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah finally asked. "The board is already concerned about your public image." "I'm sure," James said firmly. "These are my children. I'm not hiding them anymore." The following day, James drove to Amara's apartment. The boys were at school, giving them a chance to talk privately. "You want to do what?" Amara asked when he explained his plan. "I want to bring the boys to the charity gala," James repeated, "to publicly acknowledge them as my sons." Amara shook her head. "James, that's a formal event full of business people and socialites. The boys are 5 years old. They can't sit still for a 5-course meal." "They wouldn't stay for the whole evening," James explained. "Just the early reception. I want people to meet them, to see them as my family." "These are the same people who have been gossiping about us for weeks," Amara pointed out. "Why expose the boys to that?" "Because I'm tired of hiding," James said. "I'm tired of acting like they're a secret or a mistake." Amara studied his face. "This will change things for you professionally." "Things have already changed," James admitted. "The board is looking for reasons to push me out, but I don't care anymore. The boys deserve better than a father who pretends they don't exist." After a long moment, Amara nodded slowly. "Okay, but I have conditions. They attend only for 1 hour. We prepare them properly for what to expect, and at the first sign that any of them is uncomfortable, I take them home." "Agreed," James said. "And one more thing," Amara added. "Their well-being comes first. Before your business, before your reputation." "I promise," James said, and meant it. In the weeks before the gala, James spent more time at Amara's apartment. He helped with homework, joined them for dinner, and learned the evening routines. He started to notice things he had missed before: how Amara stretched groceries for an entire week, how she mended clothes instead of replacing them, how she kept careful track of every penny. One evening, as he helped Marcus with reading practice, James glanced around the cramped living space. All 4 boys shared one bedroom with barely enough room for their bunk beds. Schoolbooks and papers were neatly stacked on a small desk they all shared. "Dad, am I doing this right?" Marcus asked, pointing to a word he had sounded out. "Perfect," James said, focusing back on his son. "Try the next line." Later, after the boys were asleep, James helped Amara fold laundry. "They need more space," he said quietly. "This apartment is too small for 5 people." "It's what I can afford on my salary," Amara replied. "Bigger apartments in good school districts cost much more." "Let me help," James offered. "I could pay for a larger place." "We've discussed this," Amara said firmly. "I accept the child support payments for the boys' needs. But I don't want them growing up thinking money solves every problem." James understood her pride, but he also saw her exhaustion. "At least let me get them beds for my place," he said, "so they can stay overnight sometimes. Give you a break." Amara considered this. "That might be good for all of us," she agreed. "They ask about your house." "What do they ask?" "If it's like a castle," Amara smiled. "If you have a swimming pool. If they'll ever see where you live." James felt a pang of guilt. He had never invited them to his home. "After the gala," he promised. "They can visit any time." As the gala approached, James took the boys shopping for their first suits. The salesperson at the children's store looked overwhelmed by 4 identical boys trying on clothes at once. "Do they all need the same style?" the salesperson asked. "Yes," Michael answered before James could. "We're quadruplets. We match." "But I want a blue tie," Miles added. "Blue is my favorite color." "I want green," Matthew said. "Red for me," Marcus said quietly. "And I'll take black," Michael decided. James smiled. "Different ties it is." At home, James helped the boys practice introducing themselves and basic table manners. They practiced handshakes and saying "pleased to meet you" instead of "hi." "Will there be kids to play with?" Matthew asked. "Not many," James admitted. "But there will be a children's table with special food and activities." "Will people stare at us?" Marcus asked, his usual perceptiveness showing. James knelt to look him in the eyes. "Some might. But not because there's anything wrong with you. They'll stare because you're special, and because they're curious about meeting my sons." "Will that lady be there? The one from Christmas?" Michael asked. "Victoria?" James guessed. "No, she won't be there." "She seemed mad," Miles observed. "She was surprised," James explained carefully. "Sometimes adults get upset when they're surprised." Amara, listening nearby, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. On the night of the gala, James arrived at Amara's apartment with a small box. "What's that?" Amara asked as she helped Matthew with his tie. "For you," James said, handing her the box. Inside was a simple but elegant silver bracelet. "To say thank you for allowing this tonight." "It's beautiful," Amara said, surprised. "But unnecessary." "You deserve nice things too," James replied. The boys emerged from their bedroom, all four in identical black suits with different colored ties. They had never looked more like brothers, or more like James himself. "You all look very handsome," James said, feeling a surprising lump in his throat. "Like real gentlemen," Amara agreed, straightening Michael's collar. "Like you, Dad," Miles said, beaming. The Four Seasons Hotel ballroom glittered with chandeliers and spring flowers. When James walked in with four identical boys, all conversation stopped. Then the whispers started. "That's him. Those are the children. Quadruplets, can you believe it? Poor Victoria Blackwell." James guided the boys through the crowd, a protective hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Edwards, one of my business partners. These are my sons, Michael, Marcus, Matthew, and Miles." Edward Brooks, who had been so critical in board meetings, looked stunned as four small hands extended to shake his in perfect sequence. "Pleased to meet you, sir," they said in practiced unison. Some people approached with genuine curiosity and kindness. Others pointedly turned away. James noticed Linda Chen watching thoughtfully from across the room. Sarah moved through the crowd, smoothing awkward moments with her natural charm. The boys handled themselves remarkably well, staying close to James and responding politely when spoken to. James felt a swell of pride watching them. Then Richard Blackwell entered the ballroom. His eyes narrowed when he saw James with the boys. He walked directly toward them, stopping just a few feet away. "So the rumors are true," Richard said loudly. "You've brought your offspring to a business function." "My sons," James corrected firmly. "Yes." Richard looked down at the boys with disdain. "I suppose good breeding was too much to expect from you, Wilson." Marcus, the quietest of the quadruplets, flinched at his tone. James felt a surge of protective anger he had never experienced before. "Mr. Blackwell," James said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you can attack my business decisions or my personal choices, but you will not speak about my children with disrespect." Richard raised an eyebrow. "My daughter deserved better than a man who couldn't keep his—" "That's enough," James interrupted. He knelt down to eye level with Marcus. "Are you okay?" Marcus nodded, but his eyes were wide. James put his arm around his son's shoulders. "These boys have done nothing wrong," James said to Richard. "They deserve respect and kindness like any children." A small crowd had gathered around them. James saw a photographer discreetly snap a picture. James Wilson, powerful CEO, with his arm protectively around his young son facing down Richard Blackwell. "Dad," Michael tugged at James's sleeve, "can we go to the kids' table now?" "I'm hungry." The tension broke as James smiled down at his son. "Of course. Let's get you all something to eat." As James walked away with the boys, he felt Richard Blackwell's glare on his back. But for the first time, he didn't care about the business implications of angering his former investor. His only concern was making sure his sons enjoyed the rest of their evening. An hour later, as planned, Amara arrived to take the tired boys home. James walked them to the hotel entrance. "You were all perfect gentlemen tonight," James told them proudly. "Can we do this again?" Matthew asked, yawning. "Maybe something more fun next time." James smiled. "How about the zoo instead?" After Amara left with the boys, James returned to the ballroom. The charity auction was about to begin, but he noticed several board members huddled in a corner, talking urgently. Sarah approached him with a worried expression. "They're meeting in the hotel conference room," she whispered. "Right now, about your future with the company." James nodded calmly. "Let them meet." "Aren't you worried?" Sarah asked. James looked toward the door where his sons had just left. "Not about what really matters." The board meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. James wasn't invited. When they returned to the ballroom, Edward Brooks approached James with Linda Chen beside him. "We'd like to speak privately," Edward said. In a small room off the main ballroom, James listened as they delivered their decision. "The board has voted," Edward said. "We want you to step down as CEO, effective immediately." James remained silent, waiting for the rest. "You'll retain your position as board chairman," Linda added. "This compromise acknowledges your founding role while addressing our current situation." "You mean my children," James said. "Among other concerns," Edward replied, "your focus has clearly shifted. The company needs full-time leadership." 6 months ago, James would have fought this decision with every legal option available. He would have threatened and negotiated and refused to accept it. Instead, he simply nodded. "Who will be acting CEO?" he asked. "Sarah Martinez," Linda said. "She knows the company best, and investors trust her." James smiled slightly. "Good choice." Edward blinked, clearly surprised by James's calm acceptance. "You're not going to fight this?" "No," James said. "You're right. My focus has changed." The next morning, James walked through the Wilson Properties offices one last time as CEO. Staff members watched nervously as he cleared personal items from his corner office. Sarah stood in the doorway, uncomfortable in her new role. "I never expected this," she said. "You earned it," James replied, handing her the office keys. "You'll do better than I would right now." "What will you do?" Sarah asked. James looked at the photo of the quadruplets he'd placed in his box of belongings. "Be a father. And maybe start something new." 3 days later, James toured a 2-bedroom apartment in Dorchester, just a few blocks from Amara's place. "It's available immediately," the property manager said, looking confused as James inspected the modest space. "But I should mention the security deposit is—" "That's fine," James interrupted, opening the blinds to check the view. "I'll take it." "Don't you want to think about it?" the manager asked. "Maybe look at some other options in different neighborhoods?" James understood the implication. People like him, wealthy, powerful, didn't live in Dorchester. "This is perfect," James said firmly. "I want to be near my children." That evening, James told Amara about his decision over dinner at her apartment. "You're moving here? To Dorchester?" she asked, surprised. "What about your mansion in Beacon Hill?" "I'm keeping it for now," James explained, "but I need to be closer to spend more time with the boys." "They'd like that," Amara admitted. Across the table, Marcus struggled with his homework, erasing the same word repeatedly. "Need help?" James asked. Marcus nodded. "The letters keep mixing up." James moved his chair beside his son. "Show me where you're stuck." As they worked through the assignment together, James noticed how Marcus reversed certain letters and struggled to sound out simple words. The next morning, James joined Amara for a parent-teacher conference at the boys' school. Ms. Reynolds, a young teacher with a kind smile, welcomed them into her classroom. "I'm glad to finally meet you, Mr. Wilson," she said. "The boys talk about their dad all the time now." James felt an unexpected warmth at her words. "They're remarkable children." "They are," Ms. Reynolds agreed, "each with their own strengths. Michael is our natural leader. Matthew makes everyone laugh. Miles has incredible artistic talent." "And Marcus?" Amara asked when the teacher didn't continue. Ms. Reynolds' smile faded slightly. "Marcus is very bright, but I'm concerned about his reading development. He's falling behind his brothers." "I've noticed he struggles with homework," James said. "I believe he may have dyslexia," Ms. Reynolds explained. "The school can provide some support, but there's a long waiting list for specialized testing and tutoring." "How long?" Amara asked. 6 to 8 months, the teacher admitted. "That's not acceptable," James said immediately. "What about private tutoring?" "There are excellent programs," Ms. Reynolds said, "but they're expensive." "Money isn't an issue," James stated. Amara stiffened beside him. Later, as they walked back to her apartment, she addressed his offer. "I appreciate you wanting to help Marcus," she said, "but I don't want charity." "It's not charity," James replied. "He's my son." His needs are my responsibility too." Amara stopped walking and faced him. "This is about more than just Marcus, isn't it? We need to talk about our arrangement going forward." That night, after the boys were asleep, James and Amara sat at her kitchen table with coffee. "I want to establish a proper co-parenting plan," James said. "Legal recognition, financial support, regular time with the boys." "I've managed alone for 5 years," Amara reminded him. "But you don't have to anymore," James said. "Let me do my part." "And what exactly is your part?" Amara asked. "Writing checks? Weekend visits? What happens when you get bored with fatherhood or start a new family with someone else?" The question stung, but James understood her concern. "I deserve that," he admitted, "but I'm not going anywhere. These boys are my family." Amara studied him carefully. "You've changed." "Yes," James agreed simply. They talked for hours, working out arrangements for school expenses, medical costs, and vacation time. When James left that night, something fundamental had shifted between them. A tentative trust had begun to form. 2 weeks later, James sat in his new apartment surrounded by moving boxes. The space was a fraction of the size of his mansion, with simple furnishings and no luxury features. But it had 4 beds for when the boys stayed over and was walking distance to their school. Sarah visited, looking curiously around the modest apartment. "The board is confused by your reaction," she said. "They expected you to fight, to sue, to make demands." "I'm not interested in fighting them," James replied. "I'm thinking about something completely different now." He showed Sarah sketches he'd been working on, plans for apartment buildings with features specific to single parents, on-site childcare, flexible common spaces, affordable units with efficient layouts. "What is this?" Sarah asked. "A new kind of housing development," James explained. "For families like Amara's, single parents who need support systems built into their living environment." Sarah studied the plans with growing interest. "This is actually brilliant. The need is enormous." "I know," James said. "I've been researching for weeks. Did you know that 1 in 4 children in the US lives with a single parent? Most housing is designed for traditional families or young singles." "Are you actually considering building these?" Sarah asked. "More than considering," James said. "I've identified 3 potential locations in underserved neighborhoods. Wilson Properties could—" "This isn't a Wilson Properties project," James interrupted. "This is something new, something that matters more than profit margins." The following Saturday, James attended the boys' school science fair. Parents crowded the gymnasium, admiring projects displayed on folding tables. "Dad, over here!" Michael called, waving enthusiastically. The boys had created a project about identical twins and multiples. Their display showed photographs of famous multiples and explanations of how quadruplets happen. "We included our own DNA information," Marcus explained proudly. "Ms. Reynolds helped us with the words," he added in a quieter voice. "It looks excellent," James said, genuinely impressed. "All of you worked together on this?" "Michael did the research," Miles said. "I did the drawings. Matthew wrote the funny parts, and Marcus organized everything." "We got an A," Matthew announced. Other parents glanced curiously at James, some whispering behind their hands. He was still recognizable as the millionaire developer now living in their neighborhood, but their judgment mattered less each day. Later that week, James met with Marcus's new tutor, a specialist in dyslexia education. The session took place in James's apartment, with Amara joining them. "Marcus has classic dyslexia markers," the tutor explained. "But with consistent support, he'll develop strategies to overcome the challenges." "How long until we see improvement?" Amara asked. "Every child is different," the tutor cautioned. "But with twice-weekly sessions and daily practice at home, we should see progress within a month or 2. After the tutor left, Marcus looked worried. "Am I stupid?" he asked quietly. "Absolutely not," James said firmly. "Your brain just works differently. Many brilliant people have dyslexia." "Really?" Marcus asked skeptically. "Really?" Amara confirmed. "It's like having a special kind of mind that sees things in unique ways." James watched Amara comfort their son, admiring her natural parenting skills. He was still learning, still making mistakes, but he was trying. Each day, he understood more about his son's distinct personalities and needs. That evening, as James worked on his housing development plans, his phone rang. It was Richard Blackwell. "Wilson," Richard said without greeting, "I hear you've started a new venture. Single-parent housing or some such nonsense." "News travels fast," James replied neutrally. "Before you get too comfortable with your new life," Richard said, his voice cold, "there's something you should know about the company you've left behind." James gripped his phone tighter. "What are you talking about, Blackwell?" "Your precious company is cutting corners on the Miami development," Richard said, "using cheaper materials than what was approved. Safety inspectors have been encouraged to look the other way." "That's impossible," James replied. "Wilson Properties has never compromised on safety standards." "Things change when leadership changes," Richard said smoothly. "Perhaps you should investigate before your name is attached to a building collapse." The call ended, leaving James staring at his phone. Richard Blackwell was manipulative and vindictive, but would he lie about something this serious? Early the next morning, James drove to the Wilson Properties office. The security guard looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Wilson, we weren't expecting you." "I'm still chairman of the board," James reminded him. "I need access to the Miami project files." In his former office, now occupied by Sarah, James searched through digital records. What he found disturbed him deeply. The original plans called for specific steel reinforcements in the foundation. Recent change orders showed substitutions with cheaper materials. Sarah entered, coffee in hand. "James, what are you doing here so early?" He turned the screen toward her. "Did you approve these changes to the Miami project?" Sarah leaned closer, frowning. "No, these were pushed through by Edward Brooks. He said we needed to cut costs to maintain investor confidence." "These aren't just cost cuts," James said grimly. "These are safety compromises. If there's ever a hurricane—" Sarah's face paled. "People could get hurt." "Exactly." James rubbed his eyes. "I need to figure out how to handle this without tanking the company." "You still care about Wilson Properties," Sarah observed. 20 years of my life went into building it," James replied. "I can't just walk away if people might be at risk. But I also can't miss Michael's science museum trip today." Sarah looked confused. "You're scheduling business around a child's field trip?" "Yes," James said simply. "I promised him." That afternoon, James and Michael walked through the Boston Science Museum, stopping at interactive exhibits about electricity and magnetism. Michael asked detailed questions about how each demonstration worked. "You really understand this stuff," James said, impressed. "Science makes sense," Michael replied. "It has rules that don't change." "Not like people." James considered his son's observation. "People are more complicated," he agreed. "But we can try to understand them too." "Is that why you spend different time with each of us now?" Michael asked. "Yes," James admitted. "You're all different people even though you look the same. You love science. Marcus loves books. Matthew loves making people laugh. Miles loves art." Michael nodded seriously. "Mom always knew that, even when we were babies." "Your mom is very smart," James said. "Are you going to marry her?" Michael asked suddenly. James nearly stumbled. "What? Number? We're working together to take care of you boys. Tommy at school said you should marry Mom because that's what real families do. There are many kinds of real families," James explained carefully. "Some have married parents, some have parents who live apart, some have only one parent. What matters is that everyone cares for each other." Michael considered this. "I think I understand." Like different kinds of atoms can make different molecules, but they're all still matter. James smiled. Something like that. The following day, James took Marcus to the local library. Since starting with his tutor, Marcus had made small but important progress with his reading. Today, they were choosing books specifically designed for dyslexic readers. These have special fonts, the librarian explained, and the stories are interesting for his age but with controlled vocabulary. Marcus selected several books about dinosaurs and space. As they settled into comfortable chairs, James asked, "Would you like me to read first, or would you like to try?" "You first," Marcus said. "Then I'll try." James read slowly, pointing to each word. Afterward, Marcus carefully read a short passage, working through each challenging word. "That was excellent," James encouraged. "You didn't give up on any of the hard words." Marcus smiled slightly. "Ms. Peterson says I'm persistent." "That's a great quality," James said. "It means you keep trying even when things are difficult." "Like how Mom kept going to school even when it was hard with 4 babies?" James felt a twinge of guilt. "Yes, exactly like that. Your mother is very persistent too." On the drive home, Marcus asked, "Did you know about us? Before Christmas?" The question caught James off guard. "I knew your mom was going to have a baby," he said carefully. "But I didn't know there would be 4 of you. Why didn't you visit us when we were born?" James gripped the steering wheel tighter. How could he explain his past selfishness to a 5-year-old? "I made a bad choice," he said finally. "I was too focused on my work and not enough on people who needed me. That was wrong of me." "Mom has pictures of when we were babies," Marcus said. "She keeps them in a special book." "I'd like to see those someday," James said softly. Later that week, James took Matthew to a children's comedy show at a local theater. Matthew laughed loudly at every joke, his entire face lighting up. "That was the best," Matthew exclaimed as they left. "Can I be a comedian when I grow up?" "If that's what you want," James smiled. "Would that make you proud?" Matthew asked, suddenly serious. "Matthew, I'm already proud of you," James said. "You don't need to be anything special to make me proud." "But you're proud of your big buildings," Matthew pointed out. "Everyone knows about them." James knelt to meet his son's eyes. "Buildings aren't as important as people. I know that now." After dropping Matthew home, James asked Amara, "Do the boys worry about making me proud?" "They're trying to figure out who you are in their lives," Amara replied. "They've always known about you, but actually having you around is different." "What did you tell them about me before Christmas?" Amara hesitated. "I told them their father was a successful businessman who built impressive buildings, that he wasn't ready to be a father when they were born, that he had your eyes." "You didn't make me the villain," James observed. "What would that accomplish?" Amara asked. "They needed to form their own opinions when they met you." James nodded thoughtfully. "Amara, could I see their baby pictures sometime? Marcus mentioned you have albums." Amara studied him for a moment, then went to a bookshelf and pulled out 4 identical blue books. "I made these for each of them," she explained, opening the first one. Inside were carefully arranged photographs. 4 tiny babies in hospital bassinets. Amara holding newborns with exhausted joy on her face. The babies at 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Every milestone documented. "They were so small," James said, touching a photo gently. "Premature by 3 weeks," Amara said. "They spent 2 weeks in the NICU. Rachel and I took shifts sitting with them around the clock. Each book contained the same photos but with small notes specific to each boy. Michael rolled over first. Marcus watched everything so carefully. Matthew made the earliest sounds. Miles loved colorful toys from day 1. James turned the pages slowly, absorbing everything he had missed. "You did this all alone." "Not completely alone," Amara corrected. "I had Rachel, and my mother visited when she could afford the trip from Atlanta." "But I should have been there," James said quietly. Yes, Amara agreed simply. You should have. The next afternoon, James took Miles to an art museum. Unlike his brothers, who moved quickly from exhibit to exhibit, Miles stood transfixed before each painting, studying details most people overlooked. What do you like about this one? James asked as Miles stared at a landscape. The light, Miles replied. See how it touches different parts of the trees? And the colors aren't just green. There's yellow and blue and even some red. James looked more carefully. He'd visited this museum for networking events many times but had never really seen the paintings. I'd like to make pictures like this someday, Miles said. I think you could, James encouraged. You already have a good eye for detail. After the museum, they stopped for ice cream. Miles carefully ate his, making sure no drips fell on his shirt. Dad, Miles said suddenly, are you going to come to our birthday party? Your birthday? When is it? In 2 weeks, Miles replied. We're turning 6. James felt a pang of regret for not knowing such a basic fact about his children. Of course I'll come. What are you doing to celebrate? Mom says we can have a party at the park if it's nice weather. Last year it rained, so we had it in the apartment and it was very crowded. Later that evening, James called Amara. Miles mentioned their birthday is coming up. Yes, on the 15th, Amara confirmed. Let me host the party, James suggested. I could rent a space at one of those children's entertainment centers. That's not necessary, Amara said. We always keep things simple. But I want to do something special, James insisted. Maybe a theme park, or… James, Amara interrupted. The boys don't need extravagance. They need meaningful time with people who care about them. A big, flashy party is about your feelings, not theirs. James felt defensive. I'm just trying to give them things I couldn't have growing up. Material things aren't what make a good childhood, Amara said gently. Trust me on this. They eventually compromised. James would host the party at his apartment, with Amara guiding him on age-appropriate activities and reasonable expectations. As James researched birthday party ideas, his phone kept ringing with calls about Wilson Properties. The Miami project safety issues were worse than he initially thought. As chairman of the board, he was still legally responsible for the company's actions. At his Dorchester apartment, James spread out documentation on his kitchen table. Sarah sat across from him, reviewing the material. These violations are serious, she said. If we report them, construction stops, investors panic, and the company faces massive fines. If we don't report them and something happens later, people could be hurt or killed, James replied. I won't have that on my conscience. The board won't back you on this, Sarah warned. Edward and Linda are too invested in maintaining stock prices. James sighed. I have an emergency board meeting scheduled for next week, but the boys' birthday party is the day before. Your priorities have really changed, Sarah observed. For the better, James said, showing her sketches for his affordable housing concept. I've been visiting similar projects in Chicago and Seattle, learning what works, what doesn't. Sarah studied the designs. These are good, James. Really good. I've found a potential site in Dorchester. The zoning is right, and the community needs affordable family housing. Will Wilson Properties be involved? No, James said firmly. This is separate. I'm calling it Wilson Family Housing. As Sarah left, she hesitated at the door. The board meeting won't be easy. They're looking for any reason to remove you completely, not just as CEO. I know, James nodded, but some things matter more than keeping my position. After she left, James continued planning the boys' birthday party. He wanted everything to be perfect, their first birthday with him as their father. He hung a hand-drawn sign Miles had made, stored presents in his closet, and confirmed the space-themed cake order. The night before the party, as James finished hanging decorations, his email alert sounded. The message contained detailed documentation about the Miami project, Photos showing substandard materials already installed in the building's foundation, emails between Edward Brooks and contractors discussing ways to bypass inspections, and cost reports highlighting the money saved through these dangerous shortcuts. The evidence was clear and damning. If made public, it would likely destroy Wilson Properties. If ignored, it could eventually lead to tragedy. James stared at his laptop screen, then at the space-themed decorations for tomorrow's party. For 20 years, his work had always come first. Now, he had a choice to make. James closed his laptop and made his decision. The birthday party came first. He would deal with Wilson Properties after giving his sons the celebration they deserved. Early the next morning before the sun rose, James sat at his kitchen table with his phone and the printed evidence. He created an anonymous email account and sent the documentation to the building safety authorities in Miami. Then he drafted a notice for an emergency board meeting the following day. The message was brief but clear. Urgent safety concerns regarding the Miami development require immediate board attention. Meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. With those tasks completed, James focused entirely on the birthday preparations. He transformed his apartment into a space-themed wonderland. Glow-in-the-dark stars covered the ceiling. Planet decorations hung from strings. The dining table became mission control with rocket-shaped plates and cups. At exactly 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. James opened it to find 4 excited boys with Amara behind them. "Happy birthday," he said, stepping aside to reveal the decorated apartment. "Wow!" the boys exclaimed in unison, rushing inside to explore. "This is amazing," Miles said, touching a hanging model of Saturn. "Are those real constellations?" Marcus asked, pointing to the star patterns on the ceiling. "They are," James confirmed. "I researched them specially." Michael examined the space facts James had printed and displayed around the room. "This says the sun is 1,000,000 times bigger than Earth." "Look, astronaut food!" Matthew pointed to the snack table where James had arranged special treats. Amara stepped beside James, smiling. "You really went all out." "I wanted it to be special," James replied. "Their first birthday with me." "It's perfect," Amara said softly. Soon other children arrived with their parents. James greeted each family, suddenly aware of how differently they looked at him compared to his business associates. These parents didn't care about his wealth or company. They cared about their children's happiness and safety. "You must be Michael's father," said a woman with a friendly smile. "I'm Emma's mom, Lisa. The boys talk about you all the time in class." "They do?" James asked, surprised. "Oh yes," Lisa laughed. "According to Emma, you're building a rocket ship to take them all to Mars." "That's Matthew's imagination," James smiled. "He tends to exaggerate." As more families arrived, James noticed something interesting. Parents naturally helped Amara without being asked. One mom organized the gift table. Another dad supervised the younger siblings. They moved around each other with the easy rhythm of people who had helped each other many times before. "The space scavenger hunt starts in 5 minutes," James announced, bringing out clue cards he had prepared. The children lined up eagerly as James explained the rules. Each team needs to find all 8 planets hidden around the apartment. When you find one, bring it to Mission Control for your special mission patch. While the children searched excitedly, James stood next to Amara. "You've created a real community," he observed. "We help each other," Amara explained. "Single parents understand what it's like to do everything alone. When Marcus had chickenpox, Lisa took the other boys for playdates so I could focus on him. When her daughter broke her arm, I picked Emma up from school for 2 weeks." James felt a twinge of guilt. "I should have been here to help." "You're here now," Amara replied. After the scavenger hunt came cake time. James proudly carried out the galaxy cake he had ordered, a dark blue frosted cake with swirls of purple and specks of silver, topped with 4 different colored astronaut figures. Everyone sang happy birthday, and the quadruplets blew out their candles together. As James cut the cake, he felt an unexpected lump in his throat. Last year, he hadn't even known these birthdays were happening. Now he couldn't imagine missing another one. When it was time for presents, the boys opened their gifts with excitement. Their friends had brought books, games, and small toys. The biggest hit was a set of walkie-talkies that all four immediately started using from different corners of the apartment. "I have one more surprise," James announced when the other presents were opened. He brought out 4 identical boxes wrapped in star-patterned paper. The boys opened them to find what looked like small projectors. "What are they?" Michael asked. "Come see," James said, leading everyone into the boys' bedroom where he had installed blackout curtains for the demonstration. When he turned off the lights and switched on the projectors, the room was filled with stars. Each projector displayed a different constellation shaped to spell out one boy's name. "That's my name," Miles gasped, pointing to his star pattern. "And that's mine," Marcus added, his face glowing with wonder. "I made one for your bedroom at Mom's house, too," James explained, "so you can see your stars wherever you sleep." Amara touched his arm gently. "This is the most thoughtful gift," she whispered, her eyes shining with tears. "Not expensive toys, but something meaningful." After the other families left and the boys were occupied with their new gifts, James and Amara cleaned up the kitchen together. "I need to tell you something," James said quietly. "I found evidence that Wilson Properties has been using substandard materials in the Miami development, dangerous shortcuts that could put people at risk." Amara stopped wiping the counter. "What are you going to do?" "I already did it," James replied. "I reported the violations to the authorities this morning. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow." "You'll lose millions," Amara said. "Yes," James agreed. "The company will face fines, construction delays, investor panic. The stock is probably already dropping as word gets out. But you did it anyway. I couldn't live with myself if someone got hurt because of corners cut by my company," James said simply. Amara looked at him for a long moment. "You really have changed." Just then, Miles ran into the kitchen. "Dad!" The walkie-talkies work all the way from the bedroom. "That's great," James smiled, ruffling his son's hair. "Can we watch a space movie now?" Miles asked. "If it's okay with your mom," James replied. As they settled on the couch to watch a child-friendly film about astronauts, James's phone vibrated in his pocket. The screen showed a news alert. "Wilson Properties stock falls 15% on rumors of safety violations." James silenced the phone without reading further. Right now, his sons were snuggled beside him, completely content in this moment. The business crisis could wait until tomorrow. After the movie, when the boys were yawning despite their protests that they weren't tired, Amara prepared to take them home. "Can't we stay here tonight?" Matthew asked. "Not tonight," Amara said gently. "Dad has an important meeting tomorrow morning." James helped them gather their gifts. "We'll have a sleepover soon, I promise." He hugged each boy goodbye, still amazed at how natural this felt now. "Thank you for sharing your birthday with me," he told them. After they left, James cleaned up the remaining decorations and prepared for tomorrow's confrontation. He organized his documentation, reviewed company bylaws, and considered his approach to the board. Around 9 o'clock, his phone rang. The screen showed Richard Blackwell. "Wilson," Richard said when James answered, "I see the Miami situation has become public." "How did you know about the safety issues?" James asked. "I have my sources," Richard replied. "You've likely destroyed yourself to save a company that was never worth your soul. Meet me before the board meeting tomorrow morning. There's something about this situation you still don't know." "What are you talking about?" James asked. But Richard had already hung up. James stared at his phone, then at the birthday decorations he hadn't yet taken down. The paper planets still hung from the ceiling. Glitter from the craft's activity sparkled on his floor. 6 months ago, his entire identity had been wrapped up in Wilson Properties. Now, standing in his modest apartment surrounded by children's birthday remnants, he realized how much had changed. Whatever happened tomorrow with the board and with Richard Blackwell, his most important title wasn't chairman or CEO. It was Dad. As James prepared for bed, his phone chimed with a message from Amara. She had sent a photo of the boys in their beds at home, the constellation night lights glowing above them, their faces peaceful and happy. They said it was the best birthday ever. Her message read, "Thank you for making it special." James smiled and set his alarm for early morning. Tomorrow would bring a professional battle, but tonight he would sleep well, knowing he had made the right choice, for his sons and for himself. James woke before his alarm, showered quickly, and left his apartment while the stars were still visible in the early morning sky. Downtown Boston was quiet at 6 o'clock, with only a few coffee shops open for early workers. He found Richard Blackwell already waiting at an empty restaurant near the Wilson Properties headquarters. The staff hadn't even arrived yet. Richard had clearly arranged private access. "You're on time," Richard observed, gesturing to a chair across from him. "I've ordered coffee." "Why am I here?" James asked, remaining standing. "What do you know about the Miami project that I don't?" Richard's smile was thin. "Sit down, James. This conversation will take a few minutes." James reluctantly took a seat as a server appeared with a coffee pot, filled 2 cups, and disappeared again. "The materials in the Miami project," Richard began, "were never actually used in construction." "What?" James leaned forward. "Oh, they were purchased. The paperwork exists. Edward Brooks did authorize those changes." Richard took a sip of coffee. "But they were flagged in an internal review before installation. The actual building has the proper materials." James stared at him. "That's not what the documentation shows." "Because the documentation you received was carefully curated," Richard said. "By me." "You?" James's voice rose. "Why would you do that?" "To test you," Richard replied calmly. "To see what kind of man you've become." James felt anger rising. "You manipulated evidence about building safety as a test." "No actual safety was ever compromised," Richard corrected. "But you didn't know that when you made your choice. You believed people might be at risk, and you chose to protect them over protecting your fortune." "You had no right," James said through clenched teeth. "The company's stock is crashing. People's jobs are at risk." "The stock will recover once the truth is revealed," Richard waved dismissively. "And now I know something important about you." "What's that?" James asked. "That Victoria's judgment about you was wrong," Richard said. "When my daughter first brought you home 5 years ago, I saw an ambitious man who would do anything to succeed. I didn't trust you with her future." "So you sabotaged our engagement?" James asked incredulously. "I didn't need to," Richard replied. "You did that yourself when you hid the existence of your children. But I've been watching you these past months, James. You've changed." "I don't need your approval," James said coldly. "No, but you do need to know the truth before your board meeting." Richard slid a folder across the table. "This contains the real documentation about the Miami project. Everything is up to code. No violations occurred." James opened the folder, scanning the official inspection reports and material verifications. "Why are you giving me this now?" he asked. "Because despite our differences, I respect what you've become," Richard said. "A man who would sacrifice his own interests to do what's right deserves the truth." 2 hours later, James stood before the Wilson Properties board in the main conference room. 8 faces watched him with expressions ranging from hostility to confusion. "Before we begin," James said, "I need to clarify something about the Miami project." He distributed copies of the documentation Richard had given him. These reports confirm that despite initial concerns, all materials used meet or exceed safety standards. There are no violations. The relief in the room was palpable. Edward Brooks leaned forward. "Then why did you call this emergency meeting?" "Because even though this situation wasn't what it appeared, it revealed something important," James replied. "It showed me where everyone's priorities lie, including my own." James walked around the table slowly. "Some of you were willing to cut corners on safety to save money. Others were willing to cover up problems rather than fix them. And I was prepared to sacrifice my position in this company to prevent potential harm." "That's very noble," Linda Chen said skeptically. "But where does it leave Wilson Properties?" "In need of new leadership," James stated. "Not just a new CEO, but a new direction." James stopped behind Sarah's chair. "I'm appointing Sarah Martinez as permanent CEO, effective immediately." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. "That's not your decision alone," Edward objected. "As founder and majority shareholder it is," James countered. "Sarah understands both the business and ethical sides of development. She has my complete confidence." Sarah looked stunned. "James, You're ready," James assured her. "And you'll have my support as chairman of the board, though my active involvement will be limited." "What does that mean exactly?" Linda asked. "It means I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on a new venture, Wilson Family Housing. It's a separate company focused on affordable housing for single-parent families." "This is about those children of yours," Edward said dismissively. "It's about priorities," James corrected. "About building something meaningful, not just profitable." The meeting continued for another hour as James outlined the transition plan. There were objections and arguments, but James remained firm. When it ended, most board members left quickly, already calling investors to stabilize the situation. Sarah stayed behind. "Why me?" she asked when they were alone. "Because you've always known the difference between what's legal and what's right," James replied. "And because you're the only person who saw me as more than my success." "Thank you," Sarah said simply. "I won't let you down." "I know," James smiled. "Now I need to go tell Amara what happened." Amara was surprised to see James at her door in the middle of a weekday. "Shouldn't you be in your board meeting?" "It's finished," James said. "Can I come in?" In Amara's small kitchen, James explained everything. Richard Blackwell's test, the board meeting, his decision to make Sarah CEO, and his plans for Wilson Family Housing. "So there was never any actual danger?" Amara asked, pouring him a cup of tea. "No," James confirmed. "Richard Blackwell manipulated the situation to test my character." "That's extreme," Amara frowned. "But I'm not surprised. Rich people can play games with others' lives because they never face consequences." "I was like that too," James admitted. Before the boys," Amara nodded. "They changed everything." "They did," James agreed. "Which brings me to the other reason I'm here. I want to establish a proper legal framework for our family situation." "What do you mean exactly?" Amara asked cautiously. "I want to formally recognize all 4 boys as my legal heirs," James explained. "Set up trust funds for their education and future, ensure they're protected financially." Amara set down her cup. "That sounds like a lot of money and legal entanglement." "It would be," James acknowledged, "but it's my responsibility." "And what would you expect in return?" Amara asked directly. "Nothing you haven't already given me," James said. "The chance to be their father." Amara considered his words. "I need to think about this. Money changes relationships, James. I've kept our arrangement simple on purpose." "I understand," James said, "but they deserve security I can provide." Amara stood and walked to a small desk in the corner of the living room. She opened a drawer and removed an envelope, yellowed with age. "Do you recognize this?" she asked, returning to the table. James took the envelope and removed its contents. A check he had written 3 years ago. The paper was creased but intact, never cashed. "You kept it," he said, stunned. "I never cashed it," Amara said quietly. I couldn't. But how did you? James trailed off, trying to imagine how she had managed financially without his money. I worked, Amara said simply. I borrowed from my mother. I got scholarships. I did what I had to do. But why? James asked. This would have helped you. Because it felt wrong, Amara explained. Like I was selling something precious. You offered money to make me go away, to keep your secret. I couldn't take it. James stared at the check, feeling the full weight of his past callousness. The amount had seemed generous to him at the time, enough to solve the problem. Now, knowing what Amara had endured while raising his sons alone, it seemed insulting. I'm sorry, he said, the words completely inadequate. I had no idea what you were facing. I didn't want to know. No, you didn't, Amara agreed. But that's the past. What matters now is what kind of father you choose to be going forward. James carefully refolded the check and placed it back in the envelope. I want to be the kind of father they deserve, the kind who puts them first, the kind who shows up. Then we can figure out the rest, Amara said. They sat in silence for a moment, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. The crisis that had begun on Christmas Eve had finally resolved. Now they could build something new, not the relationship they once had, but a partnership centered on 4 small boys who needed both of them. I have something I need to show you tomorrow, James said suddenly. Something that might change everything for our family. Amara raised an eyebrow. What is it? A surprise, James replied. But a good one, I think. Will you trust me enough to see it? After a moment's hesitation, Amara nodded. Yes, we'll trust you. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather for a drive. James arrived at Amara's apartment early, finding all 4 boys already dressed and buzzing with excitement. Where are we going? Michael asked immediately. It's a surprise, James replied, helping Miles with his jacket zipper. I don't like surprises, Marcus said quietly. James knelt to meet his eyes. This is a good surprise, I promise. Nothing scary. Is it a rocket ship? Matthew asked hopefully. Amara laughed. Definitely not a rocket ship. The family piled into James's car, which he had traded down from his luxury sedan to a practical SUV with room for all the boys. As they drove out of Boston, the boys pressed their faces against the windows, pointing out interesting sights. We're going to Newton, Michael announced after seeing a road sign. That's outside the city. Very observant, James nodded, catching Amara's questioning look in the rearview mirror. He just smiled in response. 15 minutes later, James turned onto a tree-lined street with well-kept houses set back from the road. The homes were spacious but not ostentatious, with large yards and mature trees. This neighborhood is nice, Amara commented. Very family-friendly. That's why I chose it, James said, slowing down. He parked in front of a white colonial house with dark green shutters and a wide front porch. A large oak tree dominated the front yard, its leaves turning brilliant red and gold with the season. We're here, James announced. Whose house is this? Miles asked as they all climbed out of the car. James took a deep breath. It's ours, if you want it to be. Amara turned to him with wide eyes. What are you talking about? Come see, James said, leading them up the walkway. Inside, the house was bright and welcoming. Large windows let in natural light, illuminating hardwood floors and freshly painted walls. The living room flowed into a spacious kitchen with an island and breakfast nook. Beyond that was a family room with built-in bookshelves. This house has 3 bedrooms upstairs, James explained as they walked through. Plus, a master suite on the main floor. But the best part is through here. He opened a door off the kitchen that led to a separate wing of the house, a complete apartment with its own bedroom, bathroom, living area, and small kitchen. This could be your space, James said to Amara. Private, but connected. The boys would have their bedrooms upstairs in the main house with easy access to both of us. "I don't understand," Amara said, looking confused. "Are you suggesting we live together?" "Not as a couple," James clarified quickly, "as co-parents. The boys would have one home with both parents instead of moving between two places. They'd have stability, space, a yard to play in." "Can we see upstairs?" Michael interrupted, clearly more interested in exploring than in adult conversations. "Go ahead," James nodded. "Just be careful on the stairs." As the boys thundered upstairs, Amara crossed her arms. "James, I can't afford a house like this. Not even the apartment section." "I bought it outright," James said. "No mortgage. I've sold the Beacon Hill mansion and most of my assets. This house is modest by comparison, but it's still the nicest home I've ever lived in." "You're asking me to move in with you?" Amara still seemed skeptical. "I'm asking you to consider a new arrangement that puts the boys first," James explained. "You'd have your own private space, your own entrance if you want it. I'm not proposing we get back together romantically. I'm proposing we create a stable environment for our sons." Upstairs, they could hear the excited voices of the boys discovering the bedrooms. "This one has a star ceiling already," Miles called out. "This room is perfect for my books," Marcus added. "I call this one," Matthew shouted. "We'll vote on rooms," Michael declared. Amara listened to their excitement, her expression softening. "They do need more space," she admitted. "And a yard," James added. "And good schools. Newton has some of the best in the state." "What about my job?" Amara asked. "Boston General is 20 minutes away," James said. "I checked." Amara walked through the apartment space again, running her hand along the countertop. "You've thought of everything." "I tried to," James said, "but the decision is yours. This only works if you're comfortable with it." Amara looked out the window to the backyard where a swing set was already installed. "I need time to think about this." "Of course," James nodded. "Take all the time you need." 6 weeks later, on Christmas Eve, the house in Newton was transformed. Moving boxes had been replaced by holiday decorations. A large tree stood in the living room window, decorated with a mix of store-bought ornaments and handmade creations from the boys' school art class. In the kitchen, Amara and her mother Elaine worked side by side, preparing traditional family recipes. The scent of cinnamon and baking bread filled the air. "This kitchen is a dream," Elaine commented as she rolled out dough. "So much counter space." "It makes cooking for 5 hungry males much easier," Amara smiled. Outside, James and the boys were hanging the last of the outdoor lights. Each boy had a specific job. Michael held the ladder, Marcus organized the light strands, Matthew told jokes to keep everyone laughing, and Miles directed the artistic arrangement. "A little higher on the left, Dad," Miles called out. James adjusted the lights, feeling the cold air on his face but warmth in his heart. The past year had been the most transformative of his life. He had lost his company leadership, his mansion, his social standing, and much of his fortune. Yet he had never been happier. Rachel, Amara's sister, arrived carrying presents. "This place is amazing," she said, hugging Amara. "I can't believe you actually agreed to this arrangement." "It works surprisingly well," Amara admitted. "The boys have never been more settled, and having my own space makes all the difference." The doorbell rang, and Marcus ran to answer it. "Sarah!" he exclaimed, opening the door wide. Sarah Martinez entered, carrying a large gift bag. "Merry Christmas, everyone!" Behind her came Daniel Thompson and his son Charlie, who had become friends with the quadruplets through playdates arranged by their fathers. "The Wilson family housing sign looks great," Sarah told James as she removed her coat. "I drove past the construction site on my way here." "We break ground officially in January," James said proudly. "And Wilson Properties?" Amara asked. "Recovering nicely under Sarah's leadership," James replied. "The stock price is almost back to where it was, and they've secured 3 new projects." As evening approached, the group gathered around the dining table. James looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight, his 4 sons, Amara, her mother and sister, Sarah, Daniel, and Charlie. A family created not by tradition, but by choice and circumstance. "Before we eat," James said, raising his glass, "I want to thank all of you for being here. 1 year ago tonight, everything changed for me. I thought it was the worst night of my life." He smiled at the boys. "I was completely wrong." After dinner, the children placed ornaments on the already decorated tree, a family tradition Elaine explained they did every Christmas Eve. "Each new ornament represents something important from the year," she told James. Miles hung a tiny paintbrush ornament for his new art lessons. Matthew chose a microphone for his first school talent show. Marcus selected a book to celebrate his reading progress. Michael hung a small rocket to represent his science fair victory. Amara placed a nurse's cap ornament on a high branch. "For my promotion to charge nurse," she explained. When it was James's turn, he carefully hung a small house. "For our new home," he said, "and our new beginning." Later, after the children were in bed and the guests had departed, James and Amara sat in the living room, the tree lights casting a gentle glow. "Hard to believe it's been exactly 1 year," Amara said. "From the worst night to the best," James nodded. "I never imagined this outcome when I opened my door last Christmas Eve." "Are you really happy?" Amara asked. "With all you've given up?" James considered the question. "I haven't given up anything important," he said finally. "I've only gained what matters." He looked up at the tree where 5 ornaments hung together, his house ornament surrounded by the boys' symbols. "The Wilson Family Foundation funded its first 10 scholarships today," he told her. "Single parents going back to school, just like you did." "That's wonderful," Amara smiled. "And the housing project is fully funded. The first building should be ready in 18 months. 36 units for single-parent families, with on-site childcare and community spaces." "You've accomplished so much in 1 year," Amara observed. "We have," James corrected. "None of this would exist without you showing me what really matters." From upstairs came the sound of a door opening, then small feet on the stairs. Miles appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. "Can't sleep?" Amara asked gently. Miles shook his head. "I wanted to make sure Santa could find our new house." James smiled and lifted his son onto his lap. "Don't worry. Santa always knows where good children are." "Even when they move?" Miles asked. "Even then," James assured him. Miles leaned against his father's chest, already growing drowsy again. "This is the best Christmas ever," he murmured. "Yes," James agreed, meeting Amara's eyes over their son's head. "It absolutely is." As midnight approached on Christmas Eve, snow began to fall softly outside the windows of the Newton house. Inside, the newly formed family slept peacefully under one roof, 4 identical boys with the world ahead of them, and 2 parents who had found a way to build something beautiful from an unexpected beginning. On James's desk in his home office, a calendar reminder flashed briefly on his computer screen before going dark. Victoria Blackwell, meeting request, January 5th. The subject line read simply, "Second Chances." But that was a story for another day. Tonight belonged to the family that had formed against all odds, brought together by 4 identical pairs of gray-green eyes and the power of a doorbell on a snowy Christmas Eve exactly 1 year ago. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.